Telling a story isn't about perfection. It's about communication. It's about our shared moments together. Hi, my name is Jeff Price, and I would like to welcome you to Intentional Musicianship, where we look at everything that goes on at center stage and the preparation behind the scenes needed to transform your performance into an unforgettable experience. I am here to encourage you, support you, and generally have a great time being united together with you through music. After a wonderful performing career as a storytelling musician around the globe, my joy is found in empowering musicians to find the freedom to go beyond the music stand and the fourth wall of the concert stage to better engage with their audience members. This podcast isn't a classroom, it's a brainstorming session, and it is meant for musical performers of all ages. Together, we'll explore performance practice, stagecraft, the nuances of storytelling, and the strategies for genuine audience engagement. We're here to discover what truly makes a live performance resonate. Okay, everybody, today's episode is a little unusual. That's because we're going to talk about communication and musical storytelling, but I got this information by watching a concert at a local shopping center opening. Now, here's my hope. Whatever kind of ensemble you're in, wherever you are in your performance journey, we're going to try to take some lessons that I saw from this concert, and I'm going to share them with you and see if maybe we can apply it to things that maybe you might be doing. And my hope is that some of these things will help you be more intentional in your impact as you communicate with your audiences in your live performances. So here's what we're going to discuss. We're going to look at where the performance was held and what kind of atmosphere was there as we opened the shopping center. And we're going to look at some of the roles of some of the musicians, the backup singers, or the backup players and the singer. And then I'm going to tell you some of the things I saw that were really pretty cool. I'm going to describe the setup for the stage and the lighting and the decor. And, describe some of the challenges they might have had because they're on this really small stage within the mall. And then we'll talk a little bit about performance attire and costuming. And again, talk about how those musicians on that stage collaborated with one another. And we're going to talk about the narrative that the primary performer used to storytell and set up their musical selections. And we're going to talk about audience engagement and audience interaction and how, the audience used their smartphones and took pictures and how they reacted to the stories that were being said from the stage. And then how that might have led to selling more merchandise or creating experiences for those audience members. And then, finally, we'll recap all of that and figure out how we might be able to use this in our future performances. And at the same time, I tell you what, a main lesson from this is just to look at how these musicians always gave back to their sponsors and thanked their audience and had that consistent drive to engage with everyone in attendance. So let's get started. So this concert at the local department store opening, it was called Boscov's. And it's a privately owned department store. And it's sort of a big deal in this area, particularly because it reshaped the entire mall. The entire shopping blueprint changed. And it's been 6 months as we've been waiting for this to open. Now, for this opening, they hired some musicians to come out for the event. And something's a big deal if they hire musicians. And the goal was, maybe to add some foot traffic. But, you don't need a lot because people are going to come to see this shiny new store. However, it definitely added to the atmosphere and the environment. Now, in addition to this performer, they had other couple performers peppered in for the week, but the primary draw for the every day at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. was a guy named Elvis Presley Junior. Now, his hook was that he labeled himself as the unknown son of Elvis Presley. And I tell you what, that was a clever hook. And as he spoke with us, he told us the whole story about how his mom was an extra in Blue Hawaii and how he was given up for adoption, and the whole story about when he then went to court and reclaimed his name as Elvis Presley Junior. Now, this talk isn't about getting into if he is or if he isn't Elvis, but boy, that's a heck of a hook. And it had all of us looking on Google while he talked to us and told us stories. And, that was sort of interesting in of itself. So we're going to take an opportunity to evaluate this performance to see what kind of tips and tricks that we could all take back and try to include into our performance groups. And here's my overall impression. The band worked and worked and worked to actively engage the crowd. The impact they were making was to get more follow-up in their social media following, to make relationships so that then maybe you might consider buying the performer's merchandise at the merchandise table. It was also to get people into the store and to have reasonable expectations of what Boscov's has to offer and what to expect, and to get people to get excited about the new sales and the continuing relationship the store was going to have in the community. The one thing striking, I tell you what, the difference between these professionals that were serving Boscov's and when I go to different events at colleges was striking, because they continually worked the crowd, thank the crowd for being there, thank the sponsors for having us there. And it really set a great tone for the show. Now, this was all done in a very quick 1 hour setting, because it was I went to the 2:00 show. The show, it seemed like it was just designed for each member of the audience. There was a lot of buzz as this show continued. Now, there were classic Elvis hits that maybe people might know. And then the other cool thing was the performer linked other works that they decided to sing and use to the audience in a way that they understood, and it helped them really enjoy the show and create this great experience. And then I think that the hope of that great experience was they would then go off to tell their Aunt Judy to come to the next performance. And then go tell Uncle Bob, hey, don't worry if you can't make it today. It's tomorrow, 2 and 7. And the shows were really meant to be positive. They were uplifting, always sold their sponsor. And in this case, it really was about that department store. Now, this concert had a few things that you might not be able to have at all of your shows. For example, because this was Elvis Presley Jr., the performer brought a mobile museum that somehow they take with them. Maybe they put it on a bus, maybe they have it in a trailer, maybe they have it in a truck, but all sorts of Elvis memorabilia. And that was really interesting because one hallway of the mall had things like Elvis motorcycles from the movies, some of his uniforms from the military, some of his jumpsuits. And so you could see people before and after the show getting their picture taken with this memorabilia. And I thought that was a really cool way to continue that relationship and engage that crowd. Now, the show didn't start just at 2:00 and 7:00. You see, this show had a 15-minute pre-show with the backup band. And it also included the backup singer to help with this. And their job was to warm up the crowd until the main headliner, Elvis Presley Junior, came out on stage. And it was really interesting because we were encouraged to use our cell phones. People were taking recordings. People were laughing. There was a lot of comedy. And the show just naturally took off from that pre-show, and it set us up and grounded us in memories and giving us expectation of what we were going to see. And I think a lot of us just expected us to see this Elvis Senior kind of impersonator kind of event. And it was really cool how the performer and the performers on stage chose to connect with us in such a quick way. They would always bring all these songs back to like this nostalgic past and memories that we might have either from our own personal lives or from our family members. But I said, there's no doubt because of that hook of Elvis Presley Junior performing, I think that's why a lot of us showed up. And I just really thought it was fun how that band and that performer adjusted to meet these expectations. So whatever genre we're in, we could sort of do the same kind of things for our audiences. And one of the things we may have to look back at first is why we're hired or what the purpose of our particular show is and what our role is for that particular event. Now, maybe you're hired as an entertainer for a special opening like this. Maybe you're in college or at a concert band event or at a symphony or your own recital. And you got to remember, in these cases, you're selling yourself, you're selling your sponsor or the host, and you're making the event special. So it's important to bring these things up organically and make your audience feel a part and engage your audience and thank them for being at the event. Now, when I go to shows, I take it all in and I sort of figure out how these professional musicians are doing it. How are they making a living doing this live music thing? And that was one of my fun things I really tried to key in on this event is how they can continue working and make a living by performing. And, it's easy to just say, oh yeah, they just play great music. But this performance for this opening of this store reminded me that there are so many things that go into making a performance special. And in this case, it was creating brand awareness, not only for that store, but for that entertainer. And in this case, I tell you, as he told stories and more stories about Elvis and then how he came to be and how he was adopted and how he was able to use the name and where he got the memorabilia and what these songs meant to him, it really helped us engage with this performance. Now, for each of us, you got to start somewhere. And a lot of times when you're starting something out, you're just trying to get your name out there. And so even for this, you could tell, none of us knew what the story of Elvis Presley Jr. was. We had to be introduced and we had to get some basic awareness. And maybe that means that you're trying to get people to follow you on social media. And eventually, during that show, you're going to win them over. And the goal is that they follow you. And then maybe they'll head over to that merchandise table where you have lots of things to sell. And that's what Elvis Presley Jr. had recordings, had pictures ready for autographs. And there were cards for the book that his mom had been interviewed for about the liaison within what she had with Elvis on Blue Hawaii. And the people that were with him in this band, they were working hard to make that connection too. Everybody, including, Elvis Presley Jr., they made a certain amount of money for that contract for the week's activities. But, from what I saw, Elvis Presley Jr. had a side singer with him, had a spotlight operator, and I could tell he was with Elvis Presley Jr. because of the leather jacket he wore and all the tours that he had been on with this performer. And then there was also a merchandise table person. So, just with that core means that this contract had to support each of them so that they could all make a living. And so, you could tell that in order to be successful as a professional musician, he wanted to maximize his followers in this performance to hopefully get them to that merchandise table. Not only just that they would support him and his team more effectively, but he wanted to create a buzz for that store so that people, by word of mouth and thanks to Boscov's, they might invite him to the next store opening and the next store opening after that. And I thought they were expert at working the crowd. When I think back of when I started as a musician, we didn't have social media. And it seemed like as it started, each group I was in, we always had to start a social media account from scratch. And even now, I mean, that's what I'm trying to do, even with this new endeavor with intentional musicianship. So I can really relate to these musicians as they're trying to sell themselves again and trying to get the word out about who they are and connect with people on this very emotional basis. And so that they can engage with one another and start a relationship. So back to the show. For this show, he also had 4 house musicians that performed with him. And apparently they go around to each of the Boscov openings. And they also had a sound technician who was sitting stage right doing all the mixing. Now, I believe they attend all these special events, and they've been doing it for years as Boscov opens store after store and has special event after special event, and how they're engaged with the community. That's just part of who they are. And they were really experienced and really great about working the crowd, highlighting the entertainer, and their main benefactor is they're employed by Boscov's. Now, the drummer said that he had been doing this for 42 years. That is just awesome and incredible. And so as soon as I heard that, I keyed in, I go, what is this drummer doing to be successful? Now, because of that, Elvis and his tour musicians, and then also Boscov's and their touring band, understood that their role was to complement one another and to highlight each other. And most important at all, to encourage the audience to come to Boscov's, to let them know that they're going to be part of the community for the long term. And, I thought it was just a great time. So here we are getting ready for the 2:00 show. And like I said, I chose to go on a Monday around 1:45, and I saw all these pre-show activities. And the house band, the side singer were warming up everybody. And it was sort of like when you go to Disney World and someone's there telling jokes. My favorite one is they go around and they ask, hey, is anybody here named Mike? I'm looking for a mic. And then they go, hey, is there anybody else? That's not the one I'm looking for. And they go around, they get all these mics. And at the end they go, hey, I was just doing a mic check. Hey, I'm old and I'm a dad, so that's a good dad joke. But this is the kind of really cool atmosphere, like when you get in Disney World, that you're participating. People are welcoming you. People are thankful that you're there. They're making sure people are comfortable. They're directing people to their seats. They're making sure people understand what's going to happen, what the schedule of the day's activities will be. And they were really, really effective at this. There was a general seated area, and then there was the traffic for the mall. And the cool thing is, in the seated area, because of this pre-show, everybody stayed for the entire event. No one walked out in the middle of the show. And that would have been, difficult because everybody had all their shopping bags with them too, if they would have walked out, or kids in strollers and things like that. And so when they did this and they set up the concert in such a way, it really brought everyone in and connected them. It primed them for the show. Now, as the headliner came out, it was really nice and it worked really well because in that pre-show, we got to meet a majority of the band and they got to say hello to us. And it was a nice meet and greet where we started this partial relationship. Consequently, it sort of set the mood for the show and it helped us be engaged for what was going to go on and what we were going to expect in the show and what kind of things we expected even after the show. This audience was ready for the main act as people were getting completed with this. And it was cool because, the band knew what time it was and they had sort of just planned it out that the excitement would build to that 2:00 start. And as they started, they really knew how to transition from one song to the next. They knew how to adapt to anything that the main performer, that Elvis Presley Junior, was doing. And they really made it about us in the audience. Now, in the pre-show and during the show, it was really cool because they always left room for interactions with us and engagement. And they did this with their jokes. And they were always talking with us. And they were always talking to us about who owned Boscov's, why they chose our area to come, what they were going to expect in the store, what they were going to expect in a couple months. And that was really cool. And there was a lot of energy with this. And it was nice to have people that were seasoned professionals taking the time to prepare the audience. And so I think a lesson from this is, whether you're new or you're old, you need to prepare your audience to be engaged. You have to really think about what impression you're trying to make, because you have this very short time to make a first impression. And if you get that impression right, that's going to be huge for the audience. So we got this really great professional example of what right looks like in a performance. And so when it comes to you, your band or your groups, and whatever genre you have, there are ways that you can take advantage of things like these performers did to be successful, to make sure that your musical storytelling and communication will be effective as possible. It's one thing to start cold and start talking with someone. Sometimes you just hit it off the bat. But, as you get to know someone and you warm up to them, then it's a lot easier to talk and communicate. And so if you think about that as a musician, as people understand you and who you are, soon, and you can make that connection really quick with music and the narrative, you can really effectively communicate well. And in the end, that means your audience and your audience expectations are going to be met, and it's going to be a better experience for everyone involved. Those first impressions do matter, and making that audience feel like they're a part of the experience is really important. And this concert gave us lots of effective ways to engage our audiences and maximize the impact of what we're doing. Both the artists on the stage and the audience knew exactly what to expect and when to expect it. It was clearly defined as the show went along. And that really contributed to the success of the event because it wasn't a mystery. And so I hope this is an example that helps you take your performance to the next level. Now, as we got done with those core backup band people and their role as they were warming things up, we also had a backup singer that was with the feature artist, this Elvis Presley Junior. And they were also included in the pre-show, and they added real value and sang some songs that all of us knew to get us ready for the bigger show. And depending on what kind of group you're in, and you might be in a middle school band director or a college director, there are still things that you can do as you think about it before your show or an event that can really add a sizzle factor to your main presentation. And if you can take that opportunity to figure it out, I mean, I remember recently being at a concert band concert, and one of the subgroups of that band played all the pre-music, and it made a huge difference in the entire show. And that kind of engagement, I love to see it. Now, regardless of what you end up doing, I hope you find some really cool ways that maybe you can think about ways that you can engage your audience more effectively. So let's talk about the presentation of the show. It took place in this newly refurbished area of the mall, right at this entrance. And the entrance was huge because there's 2 or 3 different openings because the store is so large. It was adorned with balloons and had streamers. And we had a single spotlight operator and a very small stage. But the spotlight was still really effective to highlight what was happening. Now, we had those 4 backup musicians and a sound man who was on that stage right, who fit on that small stage. But given the size restraints of that stage, the performers really couldn't move. So they had to adapt their stage tactics. You ever been in one of those intimate environments where you're just sort of stuck where you are? And so they had to communicate with their eyes. They used a lot of body language and facial expressions, a lot of nodding. And then, on occasion, they might put the neck of the bass or the guitar, or, the drummer might point over to somebody. And that's sort of how it worked. The side singer wore a beautiful white gown with lots of sequins. And the house band, they just wore traditional black suits as they prepared for the opening act. Now, as Elvis Presley Junior came out, the atmosphere had heightened. It was electric, and he came out and he did look the part like Elvis Presley Senior, and he donned a sequined black suit with a gold belt buckle and a necklace. Now, it met the audience expectations of that Elvis Presley impersonator or Elvis Presley Senior without seeming too tacky. Now, when it comes to wardrobe, it's sort of essential to prioritize your comfort. After all, you got to be moving around with this. You got to be selling your show. The clothes need to be practical so that you can do the load in and the load out. Now, in this particular event, it appeared everyone was comfortably dressed, striking a balance between that showmanship and that practicality. Now, those famous Elvis jumpsuits, we had 2 of them in that mobile museum that I was talking about. So no one really missed out on that. And, it is interesting as you look at people with these sequins and stuff, because the way the light shimmers off that when you get the right spotlight, it really is effective. Now, as I said, that the musicians on this small stage were highly collaborative, and everything was led by that drummer who had been doing this for 42 years. And he always took his cues from the stories being told on stage. Now, that was usually either him in the pre-show or the feature act, Elvis Presley Junior, during the show. And, he could add to the stories by engaging with one another or reminding Elvis of what was happening. And it was cool to see how everyone would provide context for each song. And it was also interesting to see how this narrative of the show just kept being intertwined, and it fostered this sense of camaraderie between the audience and the crowd. And again, we didn't know them. And within that hour and 15 from the pre-show to the end, we were engaged and we felt in the moment. And there were a lot of really great things that did it. We were, and told to get on our cell phones and record, and we cheered and we reacted audibly during the show. And the set list, of course, did have some classic Elvis songs. So we wanted to have, Jailhouse Rock or Nothing But a Hound Dog. But I don't think Elvis Presley Jr. wanted to just do exclusive Elvis songs. So to allow us to include these other songs, so that they could, have some diversity and a little bit more variety. We gave him a permission slip because he would tell us a story and introduce the song, and he'd almost ask for our permission to do it because he thought we might like it. And it was really effective how he could communicate this message without jarring us from what we really wanted, which was another Elvis Presley Senior song. And I thought that was just a really pro move. And I think this professional performer really understood the power of this narrative and how they were creating these opportunities for unexpected twists and even moments to promote merchandise or the upcoming events. They were an experienced narrator and an experienced director of the event that you went from moment to moment and it was seamless. And I guess the other word would be cohesive. And so everything from the sponsor to the performers to the audience, everybody was a part in making this a really successful and engaging event. And so whether you're, again, a music educator or a professional musician or an orchestra conductor, you can use this narrative element and incorporate it into your own shows. And the key is to find ways to engage that audience before, during, and even after that performance and provide them with this rich experience that goes beyond the music itself. Now, here were some of my other takeaways that I got from the show, my big takeaways. So we talked about the pre-show engagement, and I thought, it's important to connect with the audience before that show begins because it literally and figuratively allows you to have a more interactive, engaging experience with your crowd. You're already introduced to them. I think I also mentioned that stage presence and tactics. And on that small stage, they had to be adaptable because they couldn't move. And I was really impressed how they used that body language and that nonverbal communication to connect with each other, but also to connect with us in the audience. They were always looking towards us. Again, for their costumes and their appearance, it was about comfort. It was practical and functional. And so they had that balance of aesthetics and practicality. And you got to have an outfit that enhanced the show, but doesn't hinder the performance. And you could tell they'd worn these things again and again and again. This wasn't buying it for one event. They bought it for the long haul for many tours. And then again, I was struck by their collaboration. They were experienced, and you could tell that over time they developed their roles, especially that drum set player. That adds just a real depth to the performance. You can see that leadership on stage, and you can see that extra communication. And as they brought us in, it was really great because it wasn't just about Elvis. We were engaged with each member on stage. So never minimize your role because you make a big difference. Now, I'm also thinking about the storytelling and the context. And because of those shared stories and how they were highlighted and why they were important to that performer, it allowed us to have a deeper connection. And it allowed the artist to go beyond that standard Elvis repertoire, just like we were talking about. And audience inclusion was a big deal with everything. And I mentioned how they joked a lot. Now, the great thing about these jokes is they were including the audience in with the jokes. They avoided inside jokes. I just was recently at a jazz performance, and it was all high school educators in the area. And it was a fine show, but they would oftentimes hint at inside jokes, and they wouldn't include us in the audience with them. And so it made us sort of a little bit distant. So it was really great in this particular instance that these pros were including us into this overall experience. Again, the links to the sponsors and getting people to the merchandise table, I think this really helped because these musicians knew they had a patron, a benefactor, a boss to keep in mind. And they were able to do this organically and plug this stuff naturally so that it didn't feel forced or like it was a commercial. And I really liked how they used the audience and they got instant feedback. We were encouraged to participate. And so we were allowed to use our phones. We were all checking the validity of these Elvis Presley Junior stories in real time. And I thought that was really cool and could be done really effective in modern performances. Now, we've just unpacked a few things from this Elvis Presley Junior performance. And we've looked at everything from stage presence to storytelling to audience engagement. Now, before we say goodbye for this week, I just want to say I'd love to hear what kind of things might stand out to you when you go to a show. And you can always contact us at our website, which is intentionalmusicianship.com, or email at jeff@intentionalmusicianship.com. Or you could go to our website and book a complimentary Zoom call that we have through Calendly, where we can just talk and nerd out about some of your thoughts. Specifically, we'd love to hear what things you do in your performances to better engage your audience. For example, how do you adapt to these small settings or these really small, intimate stage settings? And how do you communicate with musicians in a pinch? And do you find value when someone like this Elvis Presley Jr. narrates and navigates these stories to help you understand where you are in the show? And how would you adapt these things that you just heard to your own performances? We all have our own special niche, whether we're a solo instrumentalist or if we're in a bigger group, or maybe we're an educator and maybe in charge of a group. And then in contrast, what issues do you have that maybe we can bring up on a future episode to address? I'm all ears. Now everyone has a story, and these experienced performing musicians gave me a great story to share with you. They loved what they were doing and loved being front of the crowd performing live music. And as I watched them, I was really happy. And I thought to myself, what a great life they have. That's it for today's episode. We hope that some of the topics and issues addressed today will be useful to you as you move forward in your musical journey. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for joining us today. We know your time is precious, and we really appreciate that you have taken the time to listen to us today. Consequently, we'd like to hear from each and every one of you. You can reach out and connect with us at intentionalmusicianship.com. My hope is that we build a community where we can encourage one another through our mutual experiences performing live music. I look forward to connecting with each of you again on the next episode of Intentional Musicianship.